The stars flickered like distant eyes, watching over the vast emptiness of space. A Terran ship, the Eclipse, drifted silently through the blackness, its crew unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their reach. Captain Nora Williams stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the endless void outside the ship's windows. It had been days since they had last communicated with any other ships. The radio silence was unsettling. As the captain, it was her job to keep the crew focused, but tonight something felt different. Suddenly, the sharp beep of an incoming transmission broke the silence. Nora's head snapped to the console, her heart racing as she saw the signal flashing on the screen. The message was weak, almost inaudible, but the signal was unmistakable. "A distress call." "Captain, we're receiving a signal," said Lieutenant Harris, his voice full of surprise. "It's strange. I can't make out much. The frequency doesn't match anything we've encountered before." Nora's pulse quickened. A distress signal meant someone was out there, someone in need of help. She quickly ordered the ship to change course toward the source of the signal. The ship hummed to life as it adjusted its path. She knew there was no turning back now. As they neared the source of the signal, the crew grew more tense. The mysterious transmission was growing louder, but still not clear enough to understand. The strange frequency made it hard for their equipment to decode. They were getting closer to the source. But what was it? The Eclipse entered a dark, uncharted sector of space where the stars seemed distant and far apart. The crew stared out the windows, unsure of what they would find. They had no maps of this area, no information about what lay ahead. It was a place where no Terran ship had ever ventured before. "Steady, everyone," Captain Williams said, trying to calm the crew's nerves. "We're just investigating a distress call. Stay alert." Minutes later, the ship came to a halt, hovering above a small, barren planet. There were no signs of life, no ships, no colonies, nothing but dust and rock. But the signal was definitely coming from below. "Captain, I'm picking up the signal from the surface," Harris said, his voice tense. "It's not from any known Terran station or ship. It's older, much older." Nora's instincts told her something was off. She knew the signal was important. But she also knew that, in space, things were never what they seem. She glanced at her team, each member silently wondering what awaited them on the planet's surface. With a deep breath, Nora made the decision to send a team down to investigate. The Eclipse deployed a shuttle, and Nora watched it disappear into the thick atmosphere of the planet below. She could only hope that they would find answers and not more questions. The shuttle landed on the planet's surface, kicking up dust as it settled. The crew disembarked, their boots crunching against the dry ground. The air was thin, almost stale. As they walked through the barren landscape, they found something strange: a set of ruins. Ancient stone structures, half buried under the sand, stood eerily silent. "Is this it?" asked Sergeant Riley, scanning the area with his weapon ready. "Is this where the signal is coming from?" "Looks like it," replied Dr. Elena Hayes, the ship's scientist. "This doesn't match anything from our records. These ruins, they could be thousands of years old." Nora led her team into the ruins, each step echoing in the quiet. The strange signal continued to play, growing stronger with every passing minute. They followed the sound deeper into the ruins, until they reached a chamber at the heart of the structure. Inside, there was a large, glowing device, unlike anything they had ever seen. It was pulsing with energy, and the signal came directly from it. As they approached, the device emitted a high-pitched whine, and suddenly, everything stopped. The signal was gone. "What happened?" Harris asked, his voice rising with panic. "The signal, it just vanished." Nora didn't have an answer. She motioned for everyone to stay close as she inspected the device. There was no obvious way to interact with it. It seemed alive, as if it were waiting for something. Then, a soft voice echoed through their helmets. "Terran, you shouldn't have come." The words sent a chill down their spines. The voice was not human, nor was it from any known alien species. It was something far older, something that had been waiting for them. Who are you?" Nora demanded, her voice shaky but firm. The voice continued, "You have found what was never meant to be found. You have awoken what was meant to stay hidden." The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the walls of the ruins cracked. Something was stirring beneath the surface of the planet. Something ancient. Something deadly. "Get out of there, now!" Riley shouted, but it was too late. A deep rumbling filled the air as the ground split open, and from the depths emerged a massive, dark shape, something so enormous it cast a shadow over the ruins. It was alive. It was coming for them. Nora and her crew ran back to the shuttle, their hearts pounding in their chests. The planet was shaking violently, and the massive shape seemed to follow them, its presence haunting every step. They barely made it back to the shuttle in time. As the engines roared to life, they watched in horror as the planet began to collapse in on itself. The massive creature disappeared beneath the ground, but its warning remained. The signal had been a trap. ASE, the eclipse pulled away from the planet. Captain Nora Williams knew that they had just stumbled upon something far bigger than they could ever understand. The silent signal had been a warning. And now they had awakened something that would never be silenced again. The crew of the eclipse would never be the same. And neither would the galaxy. The planet was silent. A deep, heavy silence that seemed to stretch out forever. Captain Alex Carter stood on the bridge of the Starlight, staring out at the swirling storm clouds that covered the surface of the world below. The blue and green planet, once a thriving colony, was now nothing more than a battlefield. Terran forces had landed days ago, expecting a quick victory. But nothing had gone as planned. The enemy was unlike any they had ever encountered before. The Zorkin, a brutal alien race, had pushed the Terrans back at every turn. Now, the Terran fleet was scattered, their forces spread thin. This would be their final stand. Alex turned to his crew. "Get ready. We hold this position. No matter what happens, we hold." There were no words of comfort, no promises of victory. Only determination in their eyes. They all knew the truth. If they failed, the Zorkin would sweep across the galaxy, and humanity's survival would be in doubt. On the planet's surface, the Terran soldiers were dug in, fortified in the remains of an old city. They had no choice but to make their stand there, surrounded by a city that was both their refuge and their prison. The Zorkin had them outnumbered, but the Terrans had something the aliens didn't: courage and the will to fight. "Captain, we've got incoming," Lieutenant Mendez called out from the communications station. "The Zorkin are closing in on the northern flank. They'll be here in less than an hour." Alex gripped the armrest of his chair, his jaw clenched. The Terrans had no reinforcements, no escape route. It was just them against the Zorkin horde. But Alex had been through worse. He had seen the worst, and he had never backed down. "We'll make them pay for every inch," he muttered. As the Terrans prepared for battle, the ground trembled beneath them. The Zorkin had arrived. Their ships filled the sky like dark clouds, casting long shadows over the city. The first wave of enemy soldiers stormed the battlefield, their red eyes glowing with hunger for blood. The Terrans fired back, their weapons lighting up the sky with flashes of energy. Alex's comms crackled with voices from the front lines. "Captain, we've lost contact with Alpha Squad. They've been overwhelmed." "Hold your ground," Alex shouted into the comm. "We'll get them back." But the truth was, Alex knew the situation was dire. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Every soldier knew it. The Terran forces were tired. Many had been fighting for days without rest. But there was no choice. This was it. This was the last chance. On the battlefield, the Zorkin forces pushed forward, their monstrous forms charging through the smoke and chaos. Terran soldiers fought fiercely, but each wave of Zorkin seemed unstoppable. The Terrans fought with everything they had, but the enemy just kept coming. Alex's heart raced as he watched the battle unfold on the holoscreen. The Terran lines were starting to falter. The Zorkin were breaking through. He had to do something. He couldn't let them fall. Not now. "Lieutenant Mendez, activate the shield generators," Alex barked. "We need to buy more time." Mendez nodded and ran to the control panel, slamming his hand on the button. The shield generators hummed to life. creating a barrier around the Terran positions. It wouldn't last long, but it would give them a few precious moments to regroup. The Zorkin were relentless. Alex could see their forces forming up for another attack, their soldiers moving like a swarm, ready to crush the Terrans once and for all. But the Terran soldiers weren't ready to give up yet. In the heart of the city, Sergeant Kara Jensen led her squad through the ruins, firing her rifle with precision. They had lost so many of their comrades, but they kept fighting. They had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They had only one option, to fight until their last breath. Kara's team reached a fortified position on the edge of the city. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the situation. "We hold this line." As the Zorkin forces closed in, the ground shook once more. Alex's eyes were glued to the holoscreen. It was clear that the Zorkin were preparing for a final, all-out assault. They had everything to lose. The shield generators flickered. They wouldn't last much longer. The Zorkin were about to break through. "Everyone, hold tight," Alex shouted over the comms. "This is it. Give everything you've got." The battle raged on, but the Zorkin were closing in fast. Alex knew the Terrans couldn't hold forever. He knew it. The shield would fall. The city would fall. The hope for victory was slipping away. Then, just as the Zorkin surged forward, a Terran fleet out of nowhere dropped out of hyperspace. The Zorkin's eyes widened in disbelief as the Terran ships blasted through the alien lines, cutting them apart with overwhelming firepower. Alex's breath caught in his throat. Reinforcements had arrived. Against all odds, the Terrans had pulled off a miracle. The Zorkin forces were scattered, retreating into the darkness of space. The battlefield fell quiet. For a moment, no one moved. But then, cheers erupted from the Terran forces. They had won. The last stand had been a success. Alex closed his eyes, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. Against all odds, they had held their ground and won. The cost had been high, and many lives had been lost. But the Terrans had proved one thing: they would never give up. No matter how dark the times, no matter how powerful the enemy, they would always fight. And they would always stand. Captain Lena Ross stood at the command station, her eyes scanning the dark space ahead. The ship, Aquila, floated silently through the quiet expanse of the Milky Way. It had been weeks since they first received word about the hidden weapon. No one knew what it could do, but the rumors were clear: it had the power to change everything. The weapon was buried somewhere on a long-forgotten planet, hidden, lost in time. Lena and her crew had been sent on a mission to find it. But finding it wouldn't be easy. And the truth was, they weren't the only ones looking. "Captain, we've arrived at the coordinates," Lieutenant Harper said. The crew knew what was at stake. If the weapon fell into the wrong hands, everything they had fought for would be lost. Lena nodded. "All right, prep the shuttle. We're going down." The crew moved quickly, preparing for the descent. They had no idea what to expect on the planet's surface. The planet was an ancient ruin, untouched by civilization for centuries. The only clue to its significance was a faint distress signal intercepted months ago, pointing to a long-lost weapon that could turn the tide of war. The shuttle descended through the planet's thick atmosphere, shaking as they broke through the clouds. Below, the landscape was barren dust, rock and twisted metal scattered across the surface. It was eerily quiet. The team touched down in the center of a desolate, ruined city. Lena looked out the window, her eyes narrowing. "This doesn't feel right," she muttered. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. "Captain, the coordinates lead us to that structure over there." Harper pointed to a crumbling building in the distance. It looked ancient, built with technology far beyond anything the Terrans had ever seen. But something about it was wrong. The design seemed too perfect, as though it was waiting to be discovered. Lena felt a shiver run down her spine. They weren't the first ones here. Someone, or something, had left this planet untouched for a reason. She motioned for her team to follow her. They made their way toward the structure, weapons drawn and eyes sharp. Every step they took seemed to echo in the stillness, the ruins watching them. As they approached the entrance, a strange hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground. It was faint at first, but it grew louder with every step. Inside, the walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was clear this place had once been alive with activity, but now it was nothing but a hollow shell. The hum grew louder, and Lena felt her pulse quicken. Whatever they were looking for, it was close. They reached the heart of the building, a massive chamber filled with shadows. In the center stood a pedestal upon which rested a small metallic object. It was nothing more than a cube, simple and unassuming, but the energy radiating from it was undeniable. It hummed with power, ancient power. Lena stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the cube. The moment she touched it, the hum stopped. A sudden silence filled the room, thick and heavy. For a second, she thought the whole building might collapse. Then, the ground shook violently. "Get back!" Lena shouted, pulling her team away from the pedestal. But it was too late. The chamber's walls began to shift, sliding open with a loud grinding sound. From the shadows emerged figures, alien creatures, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were tall, their bodies encased in dark armor. And they weren't alone. The creatures advanced, their weapons aimed at Lena and her team. "Who are they?" Sergeant Miller whispered, his hand tightening around his rifle. Lena's heart raced. She recognized the armor. They were Xyphos, an ancient race long thought to be extinct. They were the original protectors of the weapon. And they had been waiting. Watching. One of the Xyphos stepped forward, its voice echoing in the chamber. "You have awakened the weapon. Now you must face its consequences." Lena's mind raced. They hadn't just uncovered a weapon, they had triggered something much worse. These creatures, the Xyphos, had been guarding it for a reason. And now, they were here to stop anyone from using it. The tension in the room was unbearable. Lena felt the weight of their situation. They had come so far, but now they were trapped. The weapon had led them into a deadly trap, and the Xyphos were the key to unlocking its true power. Without warning, the Xyphos leader lunged forward, its weapon charging with energy. Lena fired first, but the alien's shield blocked the blast. The air crackled with energy as the two sides clashed in a deadly dance of survival. The Xyphos were too strong, too fast. The Terrans were outmatched. "Retreat," Lena ordered, her voice firm despite the panic rising in her chest. "We need to get back to the shuttle." The team fought their way out of the chamber, firing back as the Xyphos pursued. But the ancient race was relentless. They couldn't outrun them forever. The shuttle was their only hope. They reached the shuttle just as the Xyphos closed in, but as Lena climbed aboard, she felt something strange, a pull deep within her mind. The cube she had taken from the pedestal was calling to her, its energy growing stronger. But it wasn't just calling her. It was calling to them all. The Xyphos stopped at the entrance, their eyes locked on Lena and the cube. "You cannot control it," the leader warned, its voice filled with ancient knowledge. "No one can." The shuttle's engines roared to life, and Lena ordered the pilot to take off. As they ascended, she looked down at the planet below. The Xyphos watched them go, but Lena knew this wasn't over. The weapon had been unleashed, and its power was now in their hands. But whether that power would save them or destroy them remained a question. And as the Aquila soared into the darkness of space, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they had just awoken something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The galaxy was on the brink of war. For years, the Terran Federation had held a fragile alliance with the Chroman Empire, a powerful and mysterious race from the outer reaches of space. Together, they had kept peace in the galaxy. But that peace was now crumbling, piece by piece. Captain Jackson Hayes stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, gazing out at the stars. The cold, empty space seemed to mock him. It had only been a few days since they had received the first reports of Chroman ships turning on Terran outposts. For years, the Chroman had been trusted allies, but now everything was falling apart. "Captain, we've just intercepted another transmission," said Lieutenant Sarah Wills, her voice tense. She was at the communications station, scanning the incoming signals. It's a distress call from one of our colonies in the Croman sector. They're under attack. Jackson's jaw tightened. The Croman Empire had a powerful fleet, and if they were attacking Terran colonies, this could escalate quickly. The fragile alliance was hanging by a thread, and it was about to snap. "We're going in," Jackson said, his voice firm. "Set course for the Croman sector. Full speed." The crew scrambled into action, preparing for what could be their final mission. The Vanguard cut through the darkness of space, its engines roaring to life as they made their way to the edge of the Croman Empire. The journey took hours, but it felt like days. The silence in the command center was suffocating. Every member of the crew knew what was at stake. If the Croman were really turning against them, there would be no going back. As they arrived in the Croman sector, the sight before them was chilling. The stars were blotted out by a fleet of Croman ships, their massive forms blocking out the light. There was no sign of resistance, no signs of communication. It was as if the Croman had already taken control. "Captain, we're being hailed," Will said, her voice sharp. "It's a Croman ship. It's coming toward us." Jackson's pulse quickened. He had no idea what to expect. The Croman had always been unpredictable, but this was something different. "Put it through," Jackson ordered. The screen flickered, and a tall figure appeared. It was a Croman commander, but something was off. His eyes were glowing with a strange energy, and his skin seemed to shimmer unnaturally. "Captain Hayes," the commander's voice was low and menacing. "You have arrived too late. The alliance is over." "What's going on?" Jackson demanded, his voice tight. "Why are you attacking us?" The Croman commander smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "The alliance was always a lie. The Terrans never truly understood us. We were never meant to share the galaxy. We were meant to rule it. And now, we will." Before Jackson could respond, the transmission cut off. The Croman ships around them began to shift, their weapons powering up. "We're under attack," Will shouted, her hands moving rapidly over the controls. "Shields at 40%. "Return fire," Jackson ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Engage evasive maneuvers." The Vanguard rocked as enemy fire hit their shields. Jackson gripped the armrest of his seat, trying to keep his focus as the ship jolted from side to side. The Croman fleet was relentless. They were not just fighting to win, they were fighting to destroy. "We can't hold them off much longer, Captain," Lieutenant Davis called from the weapons station. "Their fleet is too strong." Jackson's mind raced. They needed to find a way to survive fast. "Wills, can you hack into their communications? Maybe we can turn the tide." "I'll try," she said, her fingers flying over the console. "But if they're using encrypted channels, it'll take time." Time was something they didn't have. The battle raged on, and Jackson could feel the pressure mounting. He couldn't let the Vanguard fall. He couldn't let his crew die for a lost cause. They needed a plan, and they needed it now. Then, just as things seemed their darkest, an unexpected signal came through. "Captain!" Wills shouted. It's a message from the Croman High Command. It's encrypted, but it's coming from the heart of their fleet." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. "What does it say?" Wills worked quickly to decrypt the message. As the words appeared on the screen, Jackson felt a rush of disbelief. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was an order from someone within the Croman leadership who still believed in the alliance. The message read, "The Croman Empire has been taken over by a rogue faction. They have seized control of the military and are using the fleet to start a war. You must stop them before it's too late." Jackson stared at the screen, trying to process the new information. The rogue faction had manipulated the situation. The real Croman leadership hadn't declared war, they had been overthrown. "Can you track the source of this message?" Jackson asked, his voice tight. Wills nodded, her fingers working quickly. "I'm on it, Captain." Seconds felt like hours as the crew scrambled to understand the full scope of the situation. The rogue faction was using the Croman Empire's resources for their own gain. If they didn't act fast, the galaxy would be plunged into a war that no one would survive. We need to contact the real Croman leadership, Jackson said, his mind made up. If we can take down the rogue faction, we might be able to stop the war before it starts. He turned to his crew. Prepare for a direct assault. We're going in to take back the Croman fleet. As the vanguard charged toward the heart of the Croman fleet, Jackson knew this was their last chance. The alliance was shattered, but it wasn't beyond saving. They had one shot at peace, and they couldn't afford to fail. The stars shimmered in the vastness of space, but for Captain Elena Voss, they were nothing more than distant lights far removed from the real danger lurking in the shadows. Her ship, the Dawnbreaker, floated through the blackness, its sleek hull cutting through the void. The mission had started like any other, a routine patrol along the fringe of Terran space. But that was before they received the distress signal. The signal had been faint, almost imperceptible, but it had been enough to draw the attention of Elena and her crew. It was coming from the uncharted sectors areas no one dared venture into. No one except the ancient race that once controlled those regions. The Orcan. Elena, said Lieutenant Roan, his voice tense. The signal is growing stronger. It's definitely coming from the Orcan homeworld. Elena's heart skipped a beat. The Orcan were a legend, an ancient, powerful race who had disappeared millennia ago. It was said they vanished after a catastrophic war, leaving nothing but ruins behind. But rumors had always lingered. Some believed they had never truly gone. Some said they had only waited. What do we know about the planet? Elena asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Rowan's fingers danced over his console, pulling up data. It's desolate, Captain. The surface is covered with deep scars from long-forgotten battles. The atmosphere is toxic. No life signs detected. But the signal it's coming from the surface, from deep within one of the ruined cities. Elena's eyes narrowed. Prepare a landing team. We're going down. Minutes later, the shuttle descended toward the barren world. As they broke through the atmosphere, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The Orcan had been gone for so long, what could this signal possibly mean? The shuttle touched down on the cracked, ash-covered ground. The city ahead was a ghost of its former self, towering spires broken and crumbling. An eerie silence hung in the air, disturbed only by the wind that whispered through the ruins. Stay sharp, Elena ordered. Keep your weapons ready. The crew disembarked, their boots crunching on the charred earth. The ancient city stretched out before them, its twisted ruins casting long shadows in the dim light. It was impossible to tell how old the city was, but it felt ancient, far older than anything the Terrans had ever encountered. They made their way through the decaying streets, the signal growing louder with every step. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rust and decay. Every corner they turned seemed to bring them deeper into the heart of the city, and still, there was no sign of life, nothing but the endless ruins. But then, they reached a massive structure at the center of the city. It stood out from the rest, its design far too advanced to belong to the primitive world around it. It was a dark, towering monument, and at its base, the signal was strongest. Elena, look at this, Rowan called, his voice full of disbelief. She walked over to where he stood, gazing at the entrance of the structure. There, carved into the stone, was an ancient symbol, the same symbol that had been found on the artifacts from the Orcan War. It was a warning, but no one knew what it meant. Elena, we shouldn't be here, Rowan said quietly. This feels wrong, like we're disturbing something. I know, Elena replied, but there was no turning back now. They stepped inside the monument, and immediately, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew colder, and the walls shimmered with strange energy. The signal was now deafening, a pulsating hum that seemed to come from deep within the structure. Elena, look! Lieutenant Morrow shouted, pointing toward the center of the room. In the middle of the vast chamber was a stone pedestal, and upon it, a glowing orb. The light from the orb flickered and pulsed, casting strange shadows across the room. Elena's heart raced. This was it, the source of the signal. But as she approached, she noticed something else. The walls of the chamber were covered in strange markings, almost like warnings. They were too ancient to understand, but one thing was clear. Whoever had built this place They had known the danger of the orb. "Elena, I don't think we should touch it," Roan said, his voice trembling with unease. "There's something off about this place." But Elena wasn't listening. She reached out and touched the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, the ground shook violently. The walls cracked, and the air filled with a deep, rumbling sound. "Get back!" Elena shouted, pulling Roan away from the pedestal. It was too late. The orb flared to life, and a terrible, hollow voice filled the chamber. "Fools," the voice whispered. "You have awakened me." The floor beneath their feet began to crack, and from the shadows, figures began to emerge, tall, armored beings with glowing red eyes. The Orcan, the ancient race that had once ruled this planet, had not disappeared. They had been waiting, and now they were free. Elena's pulse raced. The Orcan had never truly vanished. They had been dormant, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And now they had awoken. The ground trembled beneath them as the ancient enemies of the Terran race stepped forward, their weapons charged with deadly energy. The Terrans were outnumbered and outgunned, but Elena knew one thing for certain. They couldn't let the Orcan reclaim their empire. They had to stop them before it was too late. "Fall back!" Elena shouted, drawing her blaster and firing at the advancing Orcan. "We can't fight them here. We need to get to the shuttle." But the Orcan were relentless, their movements fast and calculated. They were an unstoppable force, and Elena's heart sank as she realized the truth. The Terrans had stumbled into a war that had never ended, a war that the Orcan were determined to finish. As Elena and her team fought to escape, the full weight of the enemy's power became clear. The Orcan were back, and they would not stop until the galaxy was under their control. Once again, the fight for survival had only just begun.